Hello, my name is Ryan Neal, and I'll be reading a vampire short story by Grant and Mary Workman. This is the first story in Volume 1 of the Vampire Line series. Andrew is our hero, or villain. You decide as the events unfold. You can find these vampire short stories on Amazon.com by searching Books by author Grant Workman. On Amazon, you'll also see other works by Grant and Mary. The Guide, their DNA-based vampire tale. Banished Worlds involves Harry, a former federal agent, where entire colonized planets are designated for prisons. In Descent into the Maelstrom, you can travel through time with Alicia, from the age of the dinosaurs to the end of the planet. And special thanks to David Rakelin for fantastic music for this project. I am Ryan Neal, and thank you for listening. Story 1. The Warm Neighborhood. The bones were cold and felt old, but I knew they were old. They were mine. Rejuvenation had been long this time, and I was not myself yet. Feeling the last rays of the sun sinking behind the horizon, I thought about moving from the shade of the deep-set porch. It was late January, and the air was bitter, with damp moisture hidden in its gusts. From my porch, it was an easy study of the area. This place was quiet, which helped when moving around again after being down a long time. It was easier in an out-of-the-way neighborhood with warm, helpful people. The people had no idea that I was around. If they had known, they would likely have run. The thought made me grin, because running wouldn't help. Grinning hurt my old jawbone, and that soured my mood. Not that my mood was good, it just got worse. When you had been down as long as I had, the world moved forward, and you forgot how to be in it. Your bones grew very dry, and I know mine needed a good wetting. The rays of the sunlight lingered, touching the moisture on the leaf tree branches, having a prism effect like hundreds of tiny diamonds. It was time to move. I needed to move, actually wanted to, and stepped out into the wind. The powers that be laughed as they pushed their cooling night air harder at me. My suit jacket was worn, slacks were thin, and shoes were still wet. That was another thing about being down for a long time. As you slept, your clothes failed you. I stepped further away from the doorway. There was a car running somewhere up the street, which meant people. Warm people. Listening until the direction was known took a minute, then I started walking. The engine was old and had a lifter knocking, calling me to my left. I walked the concrete path from the porch to the public sidewalk. The darkening skies promised snow before the night was over. Snow is a hated thing with me. Once you got cold, you never quite got warm again. Not for long anyway, and the snow also left tracks. I would rather that it rained, but it was cold either way. A few houses down, Still listening to the tapping lifter, a dog barked and charged me. It was behind a fence in good repair, so it could not reach me. Continuing to move forward, I heard the dog's master bark orders for it to return. He yelled some kind of apology about not seeing me before he let the animal out to do his business. I managed an over-the-shoulder wave, but did not look around at the beast or the dog. I studied my hands in front of me. Both were thin, which made the fingers appear even longer. My long fingers used to be meaty and weak, unlike now. It came to me that I should get gloves. The engine was ahead of me. I continued my trek while listening to the of the lifter getting closer. The engine fought, trying its best to warm up, and eventually warm the person operating the car. Moving forward, the vehicle came into sight. The hot air from the exhaust hitting the cold night air was creating its own fog bank. Fog was good, even with the cold. 2 people, a man and a woman, could be seen standing near the car, but they were still so far away. Keep moving, just keep moving. And I did. After they kissed, their conversations could be heard about, "I'll see you in the morning, and you be careful." I quickened my pace, but my bones just did not move fast enough. They were not wet enough. Yet. The car door opened and closed a second later. I was closer, but not yet there. The car ground into gear like the person behind the wheel had never before touched a manual transmission. The car lunged forward and out of the driveway. The man stood and watched the vehicle disappear up the street and around a corner, the lifter tapping the entire distance. He turned and started back toward his house and noticed me in his peripheral vision. Noticed me, but ignored me. That was his mistake. Not that he had a chance, even had he turned to face me. He walked to his front door, opened it, then heard my wet shoes behind him. Now he turned. I grabbed his full face in my bone-thin right hand and forced him to his tiptoes and backward into his house. We both tripped over the doorstep and crashed to the floor in his hallway. As we hit, I smacked his head onto the carpeted floor, which slightly dazed him. With me almost completely on top, it was no trouble to reach out with my foot and kick the door closed. He grabbed my throat with his right hand as he pulled at my right hand with his left. My palm covered his mouth, and as he pulled at my hand, he was able to groan just a bit louder. He was fighting. They almost all do. I curled my bony fingers until my hardened nails were through his skin and stopped against the facial bones. He screamed harder, as much as he could anyway. I lifted his head up and smacked him against the floor again. "Damn carpet," I cursed. The floor carpeting took some of the impact out of the hit. He still fought me, deciding finally to try hitting me in the face with his fist. Baring my teeth, I laughed at him, then beat his head several more times on the carpeted floor. This confused him enough to force his left arm out of my way and pull his head hard to one side so I could sink my sharp canine teeth into his neck. My teeth cut into that flesh with ease and found the warm blood waiting there. There were warm people in this neighborhood. Friendly, helpful people. I drank and could feel his strength to fight fading. His heart was beating slower. At this point, it was not needed to hold him to sufficiently wet my bones. He was not a small man, which enabled me to feast on his strength. While doing so, I heard the of the lifter from the old engine. The car pulled back into the driveway and the driver got out. Her footsteps announced that she was headed back to the house. He would cool soon, making the need to stop for her darken my mood. I stood up and moved to just behind the door, as it would soon be swinging open. The door knob rattled, the handle turned, and the door opened. "Hey, honey, you forgot to lock the door," the woman said as she entered. She stepped in, and before she noticed the man, I seized her blonde hair and slammed her head into the wall. She was unconscious at once. I closed and locked the front door, looked down at the unconscious pair of nice, warm people, and decided a quick look through the rest of the house was called for. There didn't need to be any more surprises. I stepped over the warm people and walked to the back of the house. Straight back was the living room. Just beyond that was the kitchen. Not big, but the house was not large either. In the kitchen, there were several thick dish towels and electrical cords off the toaster and the coffee maker, which would suit my needs. The backyard exited from the kitchen into the backyard. Almost full dark had fallen, which was visible from the kitchen window. The hated track-leaving snow had started falling. The bolt on the back door was in place. The kitchen table had been set for 2 people, a good indicator that my 2 warm people lived alone, just the 2 of them. On the table, amongst the clutter of last night's dinner, was a full cup of coffee. I remembered coffee and decided from the smell of coffee that hot tea was better. It did work out well for me that they had just eaten. They lasted longer that way. Exiting the kitchen, there was a bathroom to the right. At the front of the house were the bedrooms. One was clearly for storage, and the other was their bedroom. The living room had sturdy built furniture from the look and feel of it. I headed back to my warm people, pulling a lamp electrical cord free also. She was groggy and waking up, so I stuffed the dishcloth into her mouth and secured it with one of my electrical cords before dragging her to a chair in the living room. It was proven best to tie her feet together to the left chair leg, then tie her hands together to the right arm of the chair. This put her body at a slight twist and gave her a less powerful position against her struggling to get free. She would wake soon and try to fight me. She could not do that now. The man ended up on the living room coffee table. The table was covered in magazines that I pushed off onto the floor, before snapping 2 legs from one end of the table and placing the man's head on the downslope side angle of the table. As I was finishing up, the woman stirred, woke up, and looked at the man. She screamed into the gag, but her voice was muffled. I had my 2 warm people secured and had time to take my time and feast. The incline had increased blood flow to the brain, causing the man to twitch. It was a spasm, nothing more, but the woman screamed all the harder. With a look from me to the woman, terror filled her eyes. Be quiet and don't scream. You can't anyways. I motioned for her to be quiet, with fingers pressed against my lips. She screamed into the gag. It wasn't loud, so it was to be ignored for now. The man was still warm, but cooling. Blood oozed out of the earlier punctures. The liquid would not go to waste, as it would get licked from the wound before I sank my teeth in again, feeding until he cooled and his heart stopped. With my eyes closed, I stayed seated on my knees next to the man's corpse on the table in front of me. My bones were old, but they were wet and warm again. They did not feel old right now. From there, I simply sat still, not moving, not breathing, not thinking, just being warm. She tried screaming again, but still not hard enough to penetrate the dishcloth in her mouth. Little noise escaped the heavy cloth gag. To inhale was almost like breathing for us. Not quite, though. It was warmth, even if it did not last. I opened my eyes and looked at her. Tears rolled down her pale-skinned face with her eyes fixed on me. We stared back at one another for a long time, until the skies outside caught my attention. The shades on the windows reported that night had dropped its full curtain. There would be a lot of snow tonight. Cold, track-creating snow. People were warm, and it was always good to be warm. I looked to the woman. Do you believe I will hurt you? She nodded furiously. Good. Obey me, and I will not. I lied, and she knew it, but she had no choice. Time to move. The chair was easier to break apart than it was to untie her from it. I broke the leg of the chair and repeated the process with the chair arm to free her hands. With my fingers wrapped in the thick winter coat she still wore, we relocated to the master bedroom at the front of the house, closing and locking the door behind us. My bones were old, but right now they did not feel that way. The phone on the nightstand rang. She and I watched it as if we expected more, or, in her case, hoped for more. After several rings, the answer machine message came on and we listened. Hey, Sally, you're late. Taking a sick day, take it? I'll have someone stay over and cover for you. Say hey to Big Mike. We'll work on next week's schedule tomorrow. Night, Sal. The man on the other end of the phone hung up. I climbed onto the bed with Sally in tow. People are warm, and I wrapped my body around hers. She shivered like it was cold, but it was not, and she was warm. Be quiet. Be still, and I'll let you go. Understand? Sally nodded. We lay there wrapped in the warmth of her body heat while the feeding from Big Mike sank into my bones. I don't sleep. Not much. Even not before this change. Now I don't sleep at all, unless it is time to be down. At first, Sally just worked on stopping her shivering. After a fashion, she had it down to a shudder. Her breathing became slower and steadier. People want to believe the lie that they will not be harmed. They force themselves to accept the possibility that I won't hurt them. Sally was no different. I shifted position and she jumped. Her heart raced, pounding hard and fast. My bones were moist and did not feel old. The dresser in the room caught my attention. I rose up off of Sally and walked to the wooden piece of furniture. Nice black leather gloves lay there, discarded after some adventure outside. The bed creaked. Sally was moving, but not that it mattered. The door was locked, and grabbing her before she could open it would be easy. She still had her tied wrists and ankles to deal with, too. I looked at her across the room, in the mirror, and saw her image, but not mine. Not that I reflected very much back. Not that I reflected very much of one back. Sally raised a shiny black pistol, aimed it at my back, fired, and the gun jerked. I staggered from the surprise, and a second round hit me. Turning her direction, she shot me for a third time, which angered me. So I bared my teeth and started around the bed. Tied feet and all, Sally awkwardly jumped at the window, smashed through it, and landed in the fresh powdered snow. She lay there only a second, but in that second I was outside too. She raised the gun and fired several more rounds. Some even hit me. The warm, helpful neighbors all ran out into their yards to see what was happening. Gunshots ringing out in the middle of the night was not part of their nice, warm neighborhood. Bright porch lights glared into the moonless night. Some of the neighbors came out with flashlights, while others brought a flashlight in one hand and a gun in the other. I stood in the hated, track-leaving snow. Sally had a glimmer of hope. There were people around now, closing in to help her, so she stopped shooting me. Not that it mattered that she shot me. I was in a bad mood because this commotion cost me a nice new pair of black leather gloves. She messed that up, and Big Mike's blood was being wasted, dripping from my body. Sally would replace that with her own blood, so I jerked her to her feet. Sally's warm neighbors didn't know what to expect or what the trouble was. They closed in around us to investigate, to watch. They saw me drive my 4 sharp teeth deep into her soft throat and feed. As a group, they shuddered in shock before they reacted. Someone else raised a gun. A rifle fired. Then someone else fired. And another. My thin, worn suit began to take damage. Sally's blood surged into me, followed by her warm, helpful neighbor's blood. By then, my suit was too destroyed to keep. so I pulled new clothes from one of the cold neighbors and covered my old bones. The end.